Stanford University.
Welcome. Good evening. My name is Jason Lenetsky, and as director of the Anderson Collection at Stanford University, it's my great pleasure to welcome you here for our second annual Burt and Deedee McMurtry lecture. I couldn't be more excited or honored, thank you, to have Robert Irwin here with us tonight. One quick housekeeping announcement, or maybe three, is I've been asked to remind everybody to turn off your cell phones, and as well, if people could refrain from taking photographs or recording tonight's program, we would very much appreciate that. And I will let you know that not only is this being streamed live, but we will also allow the recording we will present the recording through our website soon, so you'll all have a chance to see it again. So thank you. It's really inspiring to look out at this crowd, to see so many people here. I think it really speaks to the impact of Robert Irwin's art. It's incredible to look out and see our Stanford students, our faculty, our staff, to see so many of our generous museum members. We have a wonderful Cantor Arts Center Anderson Collection joint membership program. It's wonderful to see so many of you here, as well as our docents and volunteers. Your involvement in the museums is incredibly meaningful. Your attendance here is equally meaningful, and I thank you for all of that. Artists are the lifeblood of an art museum, and the Anderson Collection is dedicated to bringing their voices, their thoughts, their ideas to all of you as often as possible. And so I'd like to extend my great thanks to Burt and Deedee McMurtry for endowing this lecture and for enabling the Anderson Collection at Stanford University to bring luminaries like Robert Irwin here to campus. I'd also like to extend incredible thanks to the Anderson family, to Hunk, Moo, and Putter. Your gift is transforming the way students are learning, the way faculty is teaching, and the way all of us are engaging with 20th century American art. So thank you. I have to say, too, we're all incredibly grateful for your inclusion of Robert Irwin's disc painting from 1969. Robert Irwin's talk, Why Art?, marks the first time the artist will be speaking here at Stanford University, and it comes at an incredibly exciting time in his career. In just a few weeks, the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden in Washington, D.C. will be opening up a major survey exploring the groundbreaking paintings and sculptures of Irwin's from the 1960s. That exhibition, Robert Irwin, All the Rules Will Change, will include a new site-conditioned scrim responding directly to the distinctive architecture of the Hirshhorn Museum. And if that wasn't enough, this summer, the first and only permanent freestanding architectural structure designed by Irwin and devoted exclusively to his art will be unveiled in Marfa, Texas at the Chinati Foundation. It's a long and wonderful project, and it's eagerly awaited, and it will be here for all of us this summer. All of this recent attention is not at all surprising. Irwin has had an incredibly distinguished career. He's long been admired for his rigor, for his thoughtful practice, for his opportunities and efforts to move his practice forward, and really for his explorations of art as perception. A tried and true Southern Californian, Irwin received his first one-person exhibition in Los Angeles in 1957 at the Felix Landau Gallery, a prestigious gallery at that time. But soon, Irwin moved to the new, younger, and equally inspiring Ferris Gallery, which had been opened by Walter Hopps and Ed Kienholz and later run by Irving Blum. It was there that Irwin's relationships with fellow artists Billy Al Bankston, Craig Kaufman and Ed Moses really helped introduce him and allowed him to have conversations about Jackson Pollock and the work of Willem de Kooning and Franz Klein. But it was at that point that Irwin chose to move away from abstract expressionism and really toward exploring the ideas of perception in his paintings. His line paintings moved into his dot paintings, which then were followed by the remarkable disc paintings, both in acrylic and in aluminum. And it's these discs, like the one we see here in the Anderson collection, that really were Irwin's first works to break down the boundaries between object and environment. And it was works like that that really helped Irwin become this pioneer of California light and space art. Irwin continued working with objects in his acrylic columns until about 1970, when he very decisively abandoned his studio career and expanded his efforts into really investigating site-conditioned installations. Since that time, Irwin has completed more than 50 of these installations, many of them temporary, and has been included in exhibitions at the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney Museum, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Diego, just to mention a few. The Central Gardens at the J. Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles are really thought to be one of the great works of this century. And Irwin's continued investigations into color, light, and experiential space within the built environment have had profound effects on our understanding of art's potential. Lawrence Weschler, writing about and with Irwin in his legendary book, Seeing is Forgetting the Name of the Thing One Sees, states, "Perhaps one of the reasons Irwin has been such a success is because he invests his teaching with the same blend of responsive openness and earnest seriousness with which he animates his art." I think it's clear that Robert Irwin believes in the power of art, and something I'm proud to say is that Stanford University also subscribes to this belief. And like Irwin, they're both actively engendering that belief in their students. And so I ask all of us to open ourselves to learning a little bit now from Robert Irwin. So please join me in welcoming Robert Irwin to our stage.
Thank you. Only half true. This is going to take a little energy. Going to take a little get started. Those are kind of pivotal behind everything I'm going to talk about, but I'm not going to talk about them. The idea that there's two kinds of knowing, two ways of going. They're both true, and they're both who we are. The thing that he said right in the beginning is kind of I'm gonna pick a bone, and the bone is the art world at this moment. It's a pain in the ass. It always has been to some degree, but now it's really worse. The art world is, the model of the art world is basically an economic model. And that's, in a sense, exemplified by the idea of the art fair, which has become epidemic, happening everywhere all the time. Everybody says they don't want to do it, they don't want to, but they all go. And tremendous amount of commerce. There are a lot of galleries who think they can actually exist without a gallery anymore. And the assumption in this art fair is something that's built in a couple of days on the cheap, with linen, not linen, but cardboard walls, oftentimes even with fabric made of, almost gunny sacks in a way, in the haste of putting all the work up, that in a sense limiting the entire possibility of what might be art to something at the lowest level, really. I'm not meaning that as, in a sense, a critique of painting, but basically paintings on a wall or sculptures that can be brought in 10 minutes and stood up and what have you. That's really, at this stage of my life, kind of painful. I essentially haven't worked in that world for a very, very long time. Not for any reason other than it didn't seem to be where all the questions were. So maybe if you have the patience, I'm going to kind of go through the kind of what I call the phenomenological reduction. And I have to remind you that I grew up in LA, and one of the things that pisses them off in New York is I had a happy childhood. It almost, in a sense, cost me everything else. I really had a good time. I was had a hot rod, and and the world was my oyster. I lifeguarded on Catalina Island and on Manhattan, on Lake Arrowhead and things like that. It was truly a pleasure. So this idea, then, in a sense, that it necessarily has to come from some kind of pain and intellectual rigor, they're right. So I had to discipline myself at one point, and that was not easy for somebody having that much fun. Joey? Joey's my assistant. The reason he's my assistant, I never had an assistant in my life until I met Joey. And the reason is that Joey was a guard at a museum in San Diego where I was doing something, and he's the first person who ever came up to me and asked me about my writing. And then he wanted to argue about it, which made him, fun to be around and a pleasure. And but I made a big mistake. I allowed myself the luxury of letting him actually take over my whole calendar. And so now I don't know where I'm going unless I ask him, and which has become somewhat humorous. I don't want to, it's a little bit tedious in a sense, but I began, as he mentioned, as a painter, and I was really bad. Where it really came to light is since I had my first big show, and he mentioned it, Friedrichs Landau Gallery, and I had just broke my leg skiing, and I came in, hung the show, and I looked at the work, and I had one of those, an epiphany, which is really bad. I mean, can you imagine how alarming that is? There you are, stark naked, and you're bad. And my friends came in the door when the opening, and they're all saying, "Great, man, you did great. Oh, wow, come on." I thought that's what friends are for, right? But a young artist by the name of Craig Kaufman, younger than I was, looked at it. He used to have this funny habit of pulling his nose when and he said, "You gotta be kidding." And realized that he knew how bad it was. So essentially, I became a student the very next day. Now, not as a student per se, they were all younger, the Ferris people at that time. And, but I started hanging out with them. And I, as I say, found out how bad I was and how much I needed to know. So I went on this kind of the beginning track, which was just to catch up with the world, with what was actually going on. And then at one point, I put a couple of abstract expressionist things there. I admired de Kooning, Willem de Kooning, who was a brilliant painter. And I tried like hell to paint like William de Kooning. He would make a stroke, it would go wham like that, and it would stop, and the paint would fly off, and it would be like the lacing of a mirror. So accurate. I thought, God, if I could only do that. So I tried doing that, but what you got, we don't have them up there? No. Well, where did my early paintings go? Oh, we're starting earlier.
Wherever you want to start, we can start.
Okay, well, that's all right. Let's just back up and go. Well, actually, this is a good place to start. Right now, we're gonna sneak up on it from behind. Okay. What you have here is at the end of the 18th century is a David coronation of Napoleon, an absolutely brilliant painting. in terms of its pictorial logic, but not a particularly good painting. And the one next to it is Malevich's White Square on a White Ground. Within 100 years, we went from the one on the left to the one on the right. I mean, that's a pretty serious history. If you stop and think, like, why, the question becomes, why in the world would we do something like that? It wasn't me or any one person or any one situation. A whole 100 years of artists slowly, step by step, took away the whole history of art and converted it from that on the one side to what's on the right hand side. That's a kind of spectacle, whether you like it or don't like it, whether you understand it or don't understand it. That history is very, very clear. And the question becomes, why would they do it? What's at stake here? When Malevich was asked, in a sense, about why he painted this painting, a white square on a white ground, even his friends were pissed off. I mean, he not only, in a sense, most people didn't know what he was doing, but even his friends said, my God, Malevich, you've left us with nothing but a desert. And he said, yes, but it's a desert of pure feeling. And what he meant by that, in a sense, was if you'd gone a little bit earlier and asked Descartes at the end of his meditations, his entire life meditating, he finally said, I think, therefore I am. And what Malevich said was, no, I feel, therefore I think, therefore I am. That's a staggering proposition. And you stop and look at the art world now, and it's as if it didn't even know what its history is or what's going on. All kinds of stuff that's going on for all kinds of superficial reasons when you have something that is absolutely crucial. In fact, if you wanted to solve the ecology question, this is where it begins. It's not first an economic problem or a social problem. It's a problem of actually really loving the earth, really being, in a sense, aware of and sensitive to the qualities of it. I mean, it's quite a statement. I'll have to back that one up a little bit. You want to go on? I'm going to show you what happened, what I mean by phenomenological reduction. What happens at certain points in time when you have something like the David coronation of Napoleon, an incredible exhibition of pictorial logic. I mean, absolutely a premium. Why, and like I say, why in the world would you take something that beautiful and take it apart? When most of the people, in a sense, or the artists at that period of time were confronted with that question, they didn't really have an answer. Husserl, an interesting German philosopher, really gave the clue when he said, there are times when you are trapped in your own knowledge. In fact, when it's so sophisticated, that's when you become trapped. It becomes the paradigm to which you act and interact with everything in that process. And so he just said that the only way to move out of that, or the one suggestion, was that you would have to go through a phenomenological reduction. That is to slowly take it apart to, in a sense, examine whether it could be seen or known otherwise. And at the end of that, you may, in a sense, have a new paradigm, which is something we talk about in terms of our time in life, as opposed to the 18th century. You start on the left, we have Mondrian, who was a beautiful draftsman. It's just an example of it, a real simple thing. And on the right, you see, in a sense, a subject that he followed for a long years through his life, of trees, in a sense now with somewhat bit of a modern quality to it. Go ahead. And you see two more where you see that the tree is no longer as much a pictorial item as it starts becoming, in a sense, a thing about with energy, where the energy begins to infuse it, and the thing has a different kind of reality, a different kind of being in the world. Go ahead. The last one is not an abstraction, the one on the right. It really is to start depicting another quality of it, which, by the way, just to flatter you a little bit and maybe get you on my side, coming on this campus, seeing that incredible, what do you call it? Not a park, but a what? Oval. Well, not an oval, but anyway, you have a beautiful grounds there as a way of entering to this thing. And there's a tree out here. What is that tree? A yucca. That thing is so spectacular. It may be the best thing on the entire campus, including the museum. Go on to the next one. He then finally followed that thing all the way to, in a sense, really examining it the whole thing as a process of energy, of action and interaction between elements in the world. Go on. This is a statement he made, which at one point, you want to read that for me, Joey?
Non-figurative art brings to an end the ancient culture of art. A culture of particular form is approaching its end. A culture of determined relations has begun.
For me as a young artist at that point, that was profound. In seeing this, I wondered what that would be. What in a sense was, what was he casting? What kind of a net was he casting? The idea of art moving, in a sense, to another way of going in the world. Go on to one more set of slides. Of course, this is Broadway Boogie Woogie, which is a wonderful painting. The next one. And then he made a few attempts of working outside of the painting. And he tried this thing of putting things in space and moving them around and what have you in his studio. But he never essentially was able, because of, I think, tied in his time, able to go beyond that point. So let's go to my adventures in life. There are my bad, full of piss and vinegar. At that time, the whole idea was expressing yourself. So it was kind of a Zen thing. You would have a meal in the evening before, the right meal. You came in the morning and got yourself prepared, and then you emoted, And it was wonderful, and then you'd faint. And it was like overwhelming in a way. But after I realized they were not good. They were not bad. I mean, I wasn't even coming close to a cocooning. So I began to have to say, well, where do I begin? How do I start? And so go to the next ones. And what I did was I cut the whole thing down to size, because I realized all this was just out of control, and I was courting happy accidents in a way. So I finally got it down to a size where everything I did, and they're pretty dull. Actually, not too bad. I mean, a little better. But actually, at that point, I could control everything in there. And I realized, though, that they were a little mannered. And obviously, I realized the problem was that I was a little mannered. And I began to have to address that. By the way, there was a moment in here which also intersected. There was a guy I had a studio. He had a place in the back, and he had been in the Army. And while he was in the Army, he had the great fortune of acquiring a couple of raku wares, Japanese bowls, quite spectacular. You can't take them out of the country anymore. They are treasured items. But he owned a couple of them. And at one point, he decided I was, worth a shot. So he, by the way, was a worse painter than I was. But he invited me over to dinner. And he set 2 cans of Campbell's soup, pork and beans, and we had dinner. And at the end of that, he set out a sack. And I looked at it, and he said, these are one of my raku bowls. There's this little sack tied beautifully at the top, inside a box. First I see the box, and you open the box, and then you take the bowl out, and it's in a sack, and you take the sack open, and finally you get this thing out, this small little cup, where a thumb mark had power. And they taught me something the whole idea of bringing you, in this case, of bringing you down in scale, which the Japanese knew, that at a point where for a thumb mark counted. That was pretty interesting. So I put these things in frames and covered them on the back. Now, why that was so crucial at this point, because after you, in a sense, had the pictorial art, you got so-called abstract art, scale, for the first time, did not have a system of measure. You didn't have a figure to measure scale with. So for the first time, scale was really a powerful item to be explored. And at that point, I realized why my paintings didn't really work at scale, because I didn't understand it. I didn't understand how and in what way it existed in relationship to me. The things about these, corny in a way, but they were in wood frames, but wood frames on the back, and you were to be seen holding them. And you had a chance to have a kind of different relationship to it. For me, that was profound. I don't know about everybody else. I wasn't seeing very many other people at that time. Go on to the next. So I finally ventured back up to a size, and I found, in a sense, what I thought was a perfect size for the distances you stand away from the wall and where the painting was. I won't go into any measurements in that, but I saw, and then I spent a good period of time just drawing squares on the wall till I got a size that really had a physicality to it and a presence to it in terms of just the relationship between you and the so-called painting ground. Then I built a canvas, which was like a drum. So it, in a sense, when I touched it with my brush, it was like boom, it had a response. So it just floated from the edges. So all this, in a sense, which sounds odd, but it was essentially turning the whole act into having a physicality to it, a dimension of tactileness to it. And so I started painting those paintings. And in the beginning, they were kind of abstract expressionist paintings, thick and coarse paint and that. Go on to the next. And then at one point I realized, again, it was full of stuff that had no rhyme or reason for it. So I decided one thing to do is to work just with a straight line. And the minute a line curves, you can start reading subject matter into it. And so the idea of a straight line, period, is in a sense a kind of simple and naked relationship. That was a pretty funny experience doing those paintings. I would sit there for days putting, now all this sounds like maybe a little peculiar, but I would spend days putting that one line on, or moving it up or down, or suddenly make them close together, or creating tensions, or putting them on so they're more interesting, or so there's a different kind of play between them. I did that for several years, in which I went through periodical naps. I would sit there and stare and try and really make sense of what's going on. And then go back again. And people ask me, well, why? What the hell are you doing? I mean, what is that all about? And I really never could explain it in a way until in a period a little later, when I did a lot of writing and read a lot of philosophy, I read a passage in which Wittgenstein, who built a house for his sister in Vienna, he at one point when he finished the roof of or the ceiling of the living room, a quite beautiful ceiling, he stood there and looked at it and said, "It's wrong. It's 2 centimeters too low." So he tore the whole thing out. Raised it 2 centimeters. And the point is, why in the world would he do that? And the answer is very simple. It counts. And that's what I learned doing those things. And it was like starting at the beginning and learning what it means. I mean, everybody uses this word perception now, which I hate it. It's used in so many different ways that it doesn't mean anything now. It can be used on both sides and any side of every argument, because it's true. It's actually true on all sides. But that period of time was my growing up period. I mean, whether they were great paintings or not, apparently they're okay. I mean, they're around and what have you. But it was not an issue. The issue was essentially me training my eye, so that I could feel the quality of that. Go on to the next. Oh, we already have. And finally, I got these paintings down to 2 straight lines, which in a sense was the optimum. And they were very close to the ground. For me, in a sense, those are by far the most successful paintings of that group. In terms of scale, in terms of the physicality of it, the presence in the room when you're dealing with it. And then I asked myself another question. Wait a second, what in the world, can I really hold this entire dialogue, this entire inquiry to being within a frame? I mean, what does that mean? Is this like a magic thing, this frame? And in a way it works beautifully. In fact, you see the frame oftentimes having a real frame on it, all carved and what have you, or you might even see it on a velvet wall. And we don't even think about that this becomes a really strict concept about how we look at so-called art. Let me go to the next. So I tried to paint a painting in a sense that didn't have even the line, and that the physicality of the painting became more and more important than the elements on it. So the whole thing is made in a very slight curve. So the thing is without a dot on it. It has a kind of presence and an energy to it. But I wasn't smart enough. I couldn't stop there. I'm a painter. So I started putting little teeny dots on them, which was a kind of a suicidal thing to do. A red dot between every green, or a green dot between every red. So if there was a kind of energy, a kind of interaction. And I'm like, whew, it was painful. It was really painful. But I was, I felt that I was really learning something. And then suddenly one day I took a look at it as I had not seen before. And my God, there was a shadow around it. There's a shadow on the wall. And I thought to myself, man, that shadow's always been there. That shadow's always been qualitatively or quantitatively, it doesn't exist. It has no meaning. It has no purpose. If I took it away, it wouldn't mean anything quantitatively. But qualitatively, I realized it actually changed everything. In fact, I couldn't see without the shadow. So suddenly I have something that in one world it was always very, very important, and now it's not at all. In fact, it's a joke. It's a joke, a sick joke. On the other hand, you have this opportunity. And so suddenly I thought to myself, my God, how in the world have we, over all these centuries, have we kept the frame? And it's that, as Husserl said, that paradigm that we don't even worry about. We don't even think about it. It just takes it exists. It's everything that can be done within that thing. So if you think of the history of modern art, it's not that I did. What did they do in a way? They questioned all those assumptions about how we look at the world, how we see things. What do we mean by perception, and what do we mean by the two things here, the sentient world and the cognitive self? So I thought, can I paint a painting that doesn't begin and end at the edge? Want to go to the next one? And that's the one you see in the other room. I went through first a metal one, and which I couldn't get it to shape enough, and then finally got the plastic. By looking at a Douce Chauveau, I realized that I could get the thing to be stiff enough and hold its shape if I put a slight bend in it at one point, which you can't see. And effectively, I know you got a pretty good one here. It's in pretty good shape. You can see it, but it works pretty damn well. And there I am. I painted this thing, and it's really quite a beautiful painting. But the question's even better. The question is, why in the world am I a painter at all? I mean, you know, why in a sense don't I do what Malevich had said? Why don't I think about the world, the rest of the world? How do I apply all that so-called artistic understanding, that so-called sensitivity in that? Why can't I work outside of that frame or outside of that? And so I did. Do I have the columns next?
No.
No, I don't have a column, or do I?
We have them on the other projection.
Okay.
If you want to go to it.
I decided one time to try it. The answer is 3-dimension. There's the answer. Obviously, when I stop, you go to the 3rd dimension. You become a sculptor. But in the end, you realize that it's the same thing. There is a frame implicit in that sculpture in terms of how it occupies space, how we come to it, how we move about it. Beautiful, wonderful, but a little short in terms of all the possibilities. So I did, the only thing I could do at that time was to leave the studio, sell everything, and go out. Obvious. I went out to Four Corners, beautiful area, Utah, Colorado, Nevada, Arizona, and I was kind of hunched back up at the tip of Colorado, and I started spending time out there, and magical. I started seeing a few things that were kind of interested me. You've probably all seen them once flying over in an airplane. You see this incredible landscape, and then there's suddenly a road, a black line going through it. You start realizing the interrelationship between geometry, or the man, or the us acting in this space. In that case, just utilitarian. And suddenly the entire landscape forms itself in relationship to it. And so I started thinking, well, why in the world, as an artist, couldn't I enter into that dialogue? Why couldn't I, make sense out of this in terms of the dialogue we're having in this room in a way? How do I bring this into it? I didn't have a slightest idea. So I tried a few things. I tried the line, and I realized actually the Asian, Japanese especially, had done something similar to it, that idea of finding an ideal spot to see a vista, as the sort of act of creative, to put you in this participatory understanding of the nature in front of you. And then I could do a line, like I said, and I thought, God, one of the problems is I can't take this back to New York. And I'm not going to take bus tours out there. That seemed like a silly idea. And suddenly I'm not an artist by any of the standards or by any of the measurements that we're now using and are limited to when we do an art fair. That was a revolting development at that moment. I had no answer for it. But I actually spent some time out there and tried things and learned. Went through a kind of starting all over again, a beginning thing of how do I run my hands over this like I did a painting? How do I attend it? How do I make sense of it? That when I find an area, in a sense, the area doesn't exist separated from everything else. So the whole idea of a conditional art started in my mind. And part of knowing that is that if somebody asks me, or if I start to look at a space, I don't just look at the space because I come from somewhere. I come from this way or I come from that way. I'm in an area in which architecture exists, certain materials are in a sense in use, certain concepts of beauty, certain concepts of utility, and all those are, so I don't come from nowhere. So if I want to work in this spot, I have to look at and spend time in all this area, and really as a way cohabit with it. And so I got playing with this idea of a kind of conditional art, the idea that you don't start out to make an art, that you deal with a set of conditions. And I thought that's a great idea. So I said, I'll go anywhere for anybody for anything. And then nobody asked. You know, I mean, they didn't know what I was talking about. Nor did I, to some degree. But I needed a place to play. I needed a place to work. I needed a chance to work on this possibility. And finally, I got a couple of small opportunities. Do we have the stuff that was before? Mm-hmm. Let's just do some of that. These were all. What do we got here? All right, yeah. Okay, well, this is the earliest thing. I found a material that, in a sense, is kind of somewhat magical. It has the ability to move light about and to chap light and to define space and to alter a set of situations in the simplest and least physical way, but actually in a tactile way. Going back to the list there. And so like I said, that's one of the things I started to use. This is one which it's the old post office in Washington, D.C., and I was asked to do something there because it was what's the name of the
NEA.
NEA was their headquarters were there, and this big space, they wanted somebody to do something in there. Good, funny story, just getting you a sense of playing this game. So they asked me to come. And I said, are you kidding? I'm dying for a space. I'll pay my own way there, you know? And so I come in, I look at the space, and there's a guy in there who's refurbishing the whole thing, redoing the skylights and that. And so we started having a conversation, and he has a scaffolding all the way up to redo the dome of the building. Which, by the way, this is now Trump's hotel and his business. So we'll come back. What goes around comes around. So anyway, I go in there, and he's losing money like crazy. He'd taken the contract. He was stuck with the contract. And what the problem was, OSHA is right across the street, and they got a lot of rules. And they said to him, you can't use bridge slings. You've been using them for 100 years, and that's the only way you've always worked. Not acceptable anymore. You're going to have to scaffold the whole place. So he has scaffolded this place, and it's cost him enough money that he's losing everything. He's stuck with a contract. I forget how many thousands and thousands of dollars. I have, as a budget, $4,000 in travel money, and I'm looking at this vast space in there. Now that's where the scrim material kind of comes in as a possibility. So I start looking at this thing. First of all, I stood inside the place. I spent a lot of time there, and there are 1,000 windows. 1,000 windows in this space, and every time you're in it, you're looking from here to there or here to there. So what I did fairly simply was the idea was to take a series of window planes that just float in the air. Now it seems pretty simple. So we put a platform below it. The material's inexpensive. That material was a material was used to sift chemicals. It was made out of stainless steel, and so we set in to put this thing up there. But then we had one real problem. The problem was, of course, how do we get this thing up there? And what I did was a series of winches. And the winches go out to the center, and at a point we set a gantry, a clamp, and then drop down, and we'd build a platform, and we'd do it one level at a time and raise it up and raise it up. The problem is I hired a guy to come from New York who was a steeplejack. And this steeplejack is used to working at heights, and he came in and took one look at it and said, I'm not going up there. And part of the reason is it's 130, 150 degrees up there. All the heat rises. It's being held in by the glass, and you don't even think about it, but it's hot. I mean, really hot up there. And so he decided he's not going to go. Now, mind you, OSHA's across the street. So I'm working at 2 o'clock in the morning with the idea that nobody's going to know that I'm there. And a guy that I've been working with for years now, he says, hell with it. I'll go out there and set those clamps. And he did. He went out and set these clamps and lost about 60 pounds of water weight, just literally raining down on us. You know, now that's just this story coming all the way around. Trump has now taken over the hotel. He's going to do the best hotel in all of Washington, D.C. But it's what do you call it? A historic building, which means you can only do certain things and you have to play by the rules. So you can't change it. One of the things is he's stuck with this thing. But they made the mistake. Before anybody has, they took it all down. So now he's got to figure out how to get it all back up there. I haven't the slightest idea how they're going to resolve that one. But I'm enjoying the dialogue. I met with Ivanka, and Ivanka showed me her book, which is a piece of shit. The book is hilarious. You know that the book is just like that. It's just full of pretension. And I never had to talk her into a thing, naturally, because she's stuck. She's got to do a thing. I have no idea where it's going to go. So it's a little side story for entertainment. But in terms of these kinds of things, of projects, these are the kind of projects I was getting. I mean, in one sense, they're hilarious. You know, they're really fun because you have no idea how to solve them. And in most cases, very little money to solve them with. So you have to solve them in some really simple, very tactile way, which, by the way, is the way they should be solved. Go on to how did I get to there?
That's the next one.
Let's go back. Can't we go back a notch? Oh, yeah, okay, go to the next one. This is another project. It was in Seattle, Washington, downtown. And they gave me this plaza to do something in. Again, not much money, but I'm at this point, money don't mean anything. I'll do it if I have to camp out on the thing. So I look at the space, I spend a little time going around the thing. Seattle's this amazingly green city, but it's actually trapped in a kind of corridor in which they've trapped themselves. They have a freeway along their entire waterfront, which just destroys the whole, I mean, it's the bane of the whole city. They have this incredible waterfront, and you can't get to this ugly early freeway, which is balky and clumsy. They get pretty slick with freeways now, but they had a real problem. And so as green as Seattle is, downtown Seattle has absolutely no green in it at all. So it seemed to me one of the challenges was somehow to marry this thing to the rest of the landscape. So I came up with a plan in which I greened this whole thing. And then at the last minute, I got a hold of a set of what are called as-builts. And the as-builts basically made me realize you can't put weight on this plaza except in 9 spots. By the way, it was the city jail and the police garage. So there are 9 columns in the basement. And so you can only put weight on that, which of course is why I have 9 trees. It's called 9 trees, and they stand on the columns. But then the second part of it was the chief of police came and he said, listen, I got on the whole 3rd and 4th floor of this thing is a jail. And if I have a jailbreak, you can't put something down there people can hide behind. So you can't use any hedges or all that sort of thing. You can't, you know. So I find this material. It's called non-climbable fence. It's a very tight weave, and you can make it any color you want. It's a great thing. And as a product, it's a failure because since it's a security fence, the problem is you can cut it like butter. But you can get any color you want, and it lasts forever. Now that's almost a magical material. I've done a few things with it because it allows me a great. So I get my own engineer because I have to engineer. Send a set of drawings that have all the proper calculations and so on and so forth. And I found these guys up in Seattle who did a lot of the work with me, and they found me an engineer. And I had been using a few engineers, and they're a funny lot because they don't do much engineering. they have a book, and they look it up in the book, and then they maybe make some calculations in relationship to the book, but the book is the Bible, okay? And this guy did the whole thing for me, and then when it came the day to open it, and there was a crowd of people on there, he wouldn't go on there because he hadn't figured live load. He didn't realize that this is a completely different situation, and so he bails out, and says, I'm not putting I'm gone. That actually, I found a different category of engineers. They are people that do in the airplane industry. I mean, those guys really calculate. I mean, this thing has got to weigh very little, be very strong, have all these different. So you really have to engineer. Anyway, so found these. They're a marvelous group of people. Let's go to our next project. Just because we want to move around. What is that?
That's Vienna.
Oh, yeah. This is not what I want to talk about now, so just go fast. Show the other side of it. This is in Vienna, a place that's been an artist place for 50 years. Nobody has ever taken on the place. Everybody just shows stuff in there. So I took the whole place on. That's kind of what I did. Go on to the next one. Oh, yeah. This is at the Berkeley Museum, which is about to be torn down. It was a very funny, kind of like a German bunker, concrete walls cast, and you couldn't make out any of the rhyme or the reason of the building, why walls went which way they went. And after going through all the drawings and spending time there, I discovered that the focal point of the building is not in the building, it's outside the building. So that everything goes from, but you can't find the rhyme and reason. So I built these special fluorescent fixtures which would span a distance when you connect them together with a slot in the top, which you can drop a bead and a wire, and laid out all 4 floors. And so it triangulated the center of the building and explained the entire architectural rationale for it. I don't know how many people realize that part of it, but it's part of the whole thing of this idea of a conditional art, in which in every situation, can we go on to the next? Yeah, this is a light piece. This is in San Diego. I was asked to do this is the first thing I did inside for a long, long time. I don't want to talk about that one now. Let's go on to the next. Let's go on to the next. Do we have a garden?
We have a couple shots of the garden.
The Getty? Well, this will do. This is, I got an opportunity to Deedee Beacon, which is an art museum. Have any of you been there? Spectacular place. I was the architect, essentially. I was asked by Michael Govan to come, this old factory, a cookie factory, Nabisco. But it was a cookie, anyway, to act on this building. We didn't have any money, very little anyway, and to turn this factory into a museum, as it were. It was the first thing I discovered was a cookie cutter building. It means they designed the building and then put it in 4 different locations. The critical element of how it was placed in the site had to do that it had all sawtooth ceiling, and you wanted to face them north, because in terms of the factory, it lit the whole thing in a rather beautiful way. But in looking at this building, all the nice fenestration and the good brick in that was up against the hill, and the side you're looking, well, are we looking at? No, we're not there yet. The one side where you do now enter is where all the worst brick was. It was, in fact, they were prepared to tear down and expand the building. So you had to kind of turn the whole thing around without any money. It had a configuration of a very nice square, a rectangle, with one wing that came out here. I hope this shows this now. Yeah, go on to the next.
Do you want the shots of the front?
Wait, what?
You want the shots of it into the front?
Yeah, well, no, I want to go to the Bosque. Where are we? Yeah, okay. Is there another one, another shot?
There's the outside.
Where are they? Oh, no, don't. Backwards. Wait, backwards. There, backwards.
That's it.
Oh, we don't have it. Great. Anyway, I built a beautiful mosque on one side of it, and I started the project since most New Yorkers don't go out of New York. And so one of the things about going someplace like this is the whole experience of going, of, in a sense, starting in the city. You start in Grand Central Station, you get on the train, and you go through a tunnel, and it comes out pretty much in Harlem. It comes out in Harlem, and the city slowly disintegrates around you, and you're on the Hudson River. So now think of somebody who doesn't go out of the city, who seldom does that sort of thing. Suddenly this whole thing of just going from the city, and it's slowly coming apart, and it becomes a part of the country along the river. And then you arrive at the top of the thing, and then we can show there's others. You arrive at the top of the it's set down in a valley, and you have a parking lot. The parking lot is the bane of architects' lives. You put all the fenestration on the building, in front of the building, because that's how we've done. That's my macho. I'm showing you my building. It's a beautiful thing. And then you enter by going through in the garage, which is the worst space possible to enter a building. So it's been a constant problem. So you're entering onto this parking lot. Go ahead. Have I got it?
Mm-hmm. Just 1 second. I'm sorry.
Not yet. Okay. And anyway, when you get off the train, it's a 7.5-minute walk to the top of this bluff where you look down on the thing. There's that really good moment where you drop down into it. It is a moment you don't want to give away. It has to be a magical moment.
I'm sorry. I'm so.
There it is.
not
No,
really
we
familiar with
fall. Back one. Winter. When I mean
This is
that's
winter here,
spring,
yeah. I'm
and
sorry.
this is winter.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with-
It's a part of this little story is that this whole entrance thing. Now, think about the fun of being an artist. So here's the problem: is you have this marvelous a moment of entry. You come in from above, and that. So I go to. I've now, by the way, already done the Getty, which is a complete garden, an entire different experience. I've had this real pleasure of going to New Jersey, which is where you buy trees on the East Coast. And I go into the couple of nurseries that I know, and they don't have any trees. Sort of down by, what's that school down there? But no? Princeton. Yeah, in the Princeton area. Beautiful nursery. So I go to see all these people that I've met over the years now playing these games. And I said, man, I need some trees for this thing. And they got to be something really special because this is an ugly little town. They did a movie there called
I never remember the name.
Paul Newman. What? Did somebody know? Anyway, a Paul Newman movie. This is a miserable little town in the winter. And so I go there to find these trees because that's the way I wanted to populate the thing. And they said, we don't have any trees. I said, what do you mean you don't have any trees? He said, well, 10 years ago, the business had dropped off. And so we all pulled our horns in and planted less trees. And now, all of a sudden, business has picked up real fast, and there's a total shortage of trees. I'm like, wow, oh man. Well, what can I do? And the one guy who I knew pretty well, he said, well, there's one guy who has a nursery, and he's such a prick that nobody likes him, and maybe he'll have trees, because nobody's buying trees from this guy. So I go over there, and sure enough, this guy's got trees. And I'm looking at him, but I can't find the exactly right tree. We went through those 4 stages.
They're up again, too.
Okay, I'm looking for this tree. And this tree, as you can see, is pretty magical. In the beginning, I look at it, and it's got a good look in the spring. It's got good shape. It's in the winter when it's got no leaves. And all of a sudden, you have to go more and more time because a nursery and one plant will be great. Next time you go, it is not even there. And this one is really great. So you can't just go once. You've got to go and go and go and go. And to see all until you slowly find all the possibilities and all the incredible things that really, I mean, this is magic land. And so here was the best example of it. I go in the wintertime, and it's a miserable time in that, and I see these trees with a bright, is the red one on? No. With the bright red berries. It's spectacular. And the guy said, I said, oh man, that's my tree. And he said, you can't use it. I said, what do you mean I can't use it? He said, they've got thorns on them, huge saber-like thorns, and you can't use them in any place where, where someone could, in a public place where somebody could hurt themselves. So I'm going home that day and I'm thinking, oh, how is this possible? What? So I have a friend who I worked with on the Getty Garden, who's an arborist and a really brilliant. And I called him. I said, let me know, can I cut the thorns off? Will it hurt the tree? He said, no. So I cut thousands of thorns off the. It's beautiful. But the point I'm trying to make is I got the best game in town. Think about it. You go through a thing and you, also, by the way, we don't have the quote, do we? Do we have some more of the inside?
We do have a few other shots.
Oh, by the way, anyway, so the guy asked me to be the architect. So I am dying to be the architect. Of course, this is the best opportunity of my life. So anyway, he takes it to the board, and the board said, no, we're not going to have a dumb artist do this thing. We want a real architect, for crying out loud. Now think about real architects in museums. It is a suicidal marriage. The thing about it is plain and simple. It's not a real, you can't blame anybody in a way. The thing about an architect, I would be interested in being an architect. I mean, it's a really interesting, if I wasn't an artist, maybe architect would be the best thing, unless I go back to lifeguarding. Sitting up with that stand, man, in the middle there in the summer. Great. Where was I? Architects. You've got, what is the thing about it is that, but it's a very, very difficult thing. It's a really complicated, you have all the engineering problems, you have all the, all the rules and regulations and so on and so forth. And so jobs are it's just made up of all those parts, in which only one small, relatively small part is actually how the beauty of the building, or what a good building. But of course, that's what the architects really, that's their moment to shine. That's it for them. And so it's very complicated, except when they get a museum job. Now all of a sudden, new rules, yes, it has a bathroom, and yes, it has to, but not in the same sense. Now it's an art challenge in a way, which is for them, you can understand. Also, most museums are run by people who don't really understand architecture that much, so they kind of give them a free hand. And they are now, this is called a blue sky job. So now they have an opportunity to express themselves. And man, they build some bad buildings. I mean, that are even worse museums as such. We just saw one in Denver. What's the guy?
Libeskind.
Libeskind. He cried. He actually cried. He and his wife both cried. They cried when they found out they had to put art in it. I mean, the building challenges you to find a place to put art in it. But they had to. They had to do that. They had to put it in there. But at the reverse of it, let's say Frank Gehry, who people pick on, for good reason, to some degree, who I grew up with as a friend, but he did a thing called Bilbao, and considered one of the more questionable museums, except that they have to realize the client didn't want a museum. The client wanted a tourist attraction, and he got it. It's successful. Bilbao's on the map. It wasn't even on the map before. But the point of all this is that as an artist, think about it. This is the biggest playground you'll ever see in your life. And it really all starts to touch the world that you're in. Like when he offered me that job to come out there and do that, and they said, well, no, we want a real architect. We don't want him. So I did it for free. I just moved myself to New York and found a place to live, and I worked on that thing. And I think now some people consider it one of the best museums in the world to look at. Now, that's an interesting challenge because the artist also didn't want me to do it. They're really saying, well, wait a second, we don't want our art inside of his art, which makes perfect sense. But if I'm really doing my job is to make a museum that their art looks brilliant in, and my hand doesn't show. It's not about showing that I can do this and I can do that and I can make curves and. It's a matter about making something that's appropriate, something that makes sense, something that really works, something in a sense that's really understood by the rhyme and the reason of it being there. The game, let me tell you something, the idea of doing this is the best game in town. You go and you look and you run your hands over it and you play with it, doing the Getty Garden. I had never planted a plant in my life. I mean, incredible challenge. And in the beginning, I didn't get the job. The guy who wanted me to come and do it he left. And so I had a meeting. I had a meeting in Richard Meyer's office. And Richard Meyer had been in the thing for 7 years, doing this Getty Center. And they decided that, well, the CEO of the thing, or what do you call it, the director of that, they were going to have to decide on whether I could do this thing or not do this thing. So it became a competition that was held in Richard Meyer's office once a month for almost 2 years. And I would bring a set of drawings, which I'm doing. By the way, you had to do drawings. This is a little side thing. You had to do drawings because people weren't convinced that you were an artist if you couldn't draw. That's one of those almost a strange sort of, it's an idea every common people they hold, that you have to draw. So I would always do the drawings. I never called them drawings because obviously they were in a sense plans. They were to tell a gardener or an engineer or whatever how to build this thing or how to do the whole thing. In fact, it's a side story. It's a great one. But I would come into the office with my plans, and he would put up his plans, which he had 25 guys working on. And he had a guy there whose job it was to explain why my plan was economically unfeasible, too expensive. Or I had another guy whose job was to explain irrational, not engineered properly, what have you. And a third guy who was his intellectual apologist, which was to explain why I was full of shit and why he had the right answer. And the people are the CEO of the thing, who had actually worked in the Carter administration as something to do with economics. Anyway, it was a night. These guys were smart. They were good people, but it was not their ball game. So it was great. We did this charade for months, for 9 months, 9 plans. And the thing that was also funny, I would go in there and make my pitch, and these guys would explain to me why it was no good and why it was wrong. And on my way out, people in his office, these were all done at night, but they were still working. People in his office would walk by me and say, "Great," because I was kicking his ass. And they loved it because he was such a bad guy to the people working there. But at one point, anyway, I got the job and I did it. But you start going to nurseries and you discover this unbelievable world. And also what I later discovered in doing the garden is an audience that is so in love with gardens. They're so effusive and they're so friendly. They all used to clap when I would work there. And they'd want to hug me. And now the garden there, actually, one of the problems, it was hard to keep it going in the beginning because they didn't want to pay for gardening. Yeah, and they said, well, the maintenance people can do it. I kept saying, no, you can't. You can't have a garden without a gardener. A down on his knees, hands-on gardener. And now the docents tell me that over 50% of all the people who come to the Getty don't even go in the buildings, which has now become a problem, the reverse. It actually, but I'm saying all this in a sense to think about being an artist in this way. That's what being an artist is. Sensitivity, awareness, tuned in. Man, it's the best game you'll ever get involved in, and you can do it. Now you go to school, they're going to teach you to be a painter. Then it's a nice thing, but you can't do that. That's not what it is. Everybody in that classroom there has a sensibility. Every one of them is a unique sensibility. So you don't teach them to be a painter or to be a sculptor or to be this or to be that. You spend time with them. You find out what their sensibility is. You begin to encourage it. Maybe figure out ways for them to exercise it. And each one of them then does something you would never do, or not how you would do it. They, in a sense, now develop what is really the strength of an artist. We all have a sensibility. Some people have a little bit more conversant with their sensibility. They're more aware of it. They're more tuned into it. They're more, in a sense, interacting with it. And if they start, the ones that come to art school, that's really what brought them there in the first place. Most of them, not all of them. But they came there, and if you spend time, like who are some of the students I've had?
Chris Burton, Via Selmans, Alexis Smith, Larry Bell, Doug Wheeler.
The photographer?
Photographer?
Well, that's, come on.
Ed Ruscha.
Ed Ruscha, yeah. Now think about it. There's no way I could have taught them to be artists. I mean, they all do things that I've never done or I'm not an expert about. But, you spend time with them. You learn something the thing I learned very early was I had a little beginning watercolor class. And a lot of students, I have 3 or 4 of them from outpatients from mental hospitals, what have you, but a really diverse group. And in that process, at one point, I realized there are 4 ladies, and they're always off to the side talking to each other. They're in their 50s, their 60s. I'm this young punk at that time, 19, 20 years old. But I knew something was going on there, so I went over and I spent some time with them. This is where I learned some of the lessons that were really crucial to this, of why you teach. And I talked to them, and I realized that they were in the most unbelievably difficult moment in their lives. Their husband was busy. Their children had moved away. They were suddenly have to reform their lives. The most unbelievable task. So I knew, are you kidding? I mean, I can't teach, I don't do that. But I spent time with them, a lot of time with them, in the same way. Just what are they feeling? What are they thinking? What's going on? What are the problems at home? And so on and so forth. Spend time with them, really spend time with them. And so I thought I did a reasonably good job. And but I was about to get the best lesson of my life as a teacher, is that I went into Barney's Beanery one night to have a beer. And I'm having a beer, and this woman calls from the back room. She says, Mr. Irwin, Mr. Irwin. I look over, it's one of those ladies. She says, come on over, So I go over there, and there she is at a table with 5 Hell's Angels. And she says to me, guys, I want you to know everything I am today, I owe to Mr. Irwin. The responsibility not to do that, not to corrupt, not to, in a sense, have your own idea about what art is, not to have a class about painting, not to have a class about drawing. You may use those things in some way as a tool to act and interact for a while, but it's not about that. Every individual has a sensibility, and the idea of actually being able to play it or exercise it, we do. You do your backyard. It's an incredibly, plant material is just, I can't tell you how much fun it is. Anyway, the whole idea of the art world at this point being stuck in painting or stuck in sculpture and sticking it in art fairs and that is just overwhelmingly sad to me. I hate to end at that point, but that's just about the size of it. Any questions? In that simple sense, every one of you has a bit of artist in you. I mean, think about it. You do that. And in a sense, you know, people say, my friend, what's his name? Did the book. Weschler. Weschler wrote this book, and at one point he did the Chicago Fair every year, and I used to go once in a while and give a lecture and what have you. And one year he said, I need you to in the fair this year. I said, God, I can't come. I'm up to my eyeballs in work. And he said, what? You're not interested in ecology? That's the subject this year. I said, what the fuck do you think I've been doing all my life? This is, I mean, it's not an economic problem or a physical problem or a math problem. I mean, a money problem. It's first an absolute understanding and love for the planet. And then you solve it in all the ways you have to do. But you got to love it first.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.